Thank you for joining us for this session. And thank you for attending the 2022 Food Justice Summit Feedback Meeting in the Middle, a collaborative effort between Adirondack Health Institute and the Adirondack Food Systems Network. My name is Lynn Trisna, and I am the Executive Director at the Pitney Meadows Community Farm. This session, The Many Wonders of Small Grains, a 40-year adventure, presented by Mary-Howell Martens of Lakeview Organic Grain. Before we kick off this session, we wanted to give a huge shout out to our sponsors. They helped to make this year's event possible, and we were truly appreciative for their support. Thank you to our keynote and premier sponsors, New York State Health Foundation and Glens Falls National Bank and Trust Company. We also want to review some brief housekeeping items. During this session, you'll be muted with video off for the entirety of the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please place them in the chat, and one of the Food Justice Summit staff members will be able to assist you. We will be monitoring the chat to ensure all questions are addressed during the Q&A portion of the presentation. All presentations from the 2020 Food Justice Summit are being recorded and will be archived on the Summit webpage, available at AHI Health Network's website. Lastly, we will be sending out a survey on Friday, February 25th. We would love to hear your feedback. And now I'll turn it over to our presenter.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary-Howell Martens. I am involved in many food issues, have been for many years, both locally and also as a farmer and as an eater. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about who I am first, and then go into the rest of the presentation, which is gonna go very well with Leisha's presentation that just finished, because the two really dovetail together remarkably well. Now I've just got to figure out how to advance my slideshow because it's not doing what, okay. My husband and I started farming organically about 30 years ago. Our first organic crop was 1991, and we have been certified organic ever since. We farm about 2,500 acres of certified organic grains and processing vegetables. So this is farming organically on a scale that most people don't think about when they think about organic farms. We farm with large equipment and large acreage, large handling facility. We grow mostly grains, mostly corn, soybeans, small grains, and I'll talk more about that. But we are certified organic farmers who are very, very committed to soil health, to crop rotation, to healthy products, and to doing it all without chemicals and GMOs. We are very committed to the whole process of organic farming. In addition, in the mid-90s, the first organic dairy farmers in New York came to us asking us to make feed for them. And at the time, it was just a few, and it didn't seem like a really big deal. We started making feed. By the early 2000s, the number of organic dairy farmers had increased enormously, and we needed a bigger facility. So we purchased the old Agway in Penn Yan and started grinding feed in 2001. Since then, it has grown tremendously. We now supply feed to organic dairy farmers, chicken farmers, backyard people, mid-size small animal and poultry farmers throughout the Northeast. And it is a separate standalone business. It is not part of the farm. There are certainly synergies, but it is a standalone business that serves the feed and seed needs of the organic community in the Northeast. Now, 25 years later, our older son, Peter, works with Klaus on the farm, and our younger son, Daniel, works with me at the mill. And so we've got another generation coming along. About 3 years ago, I sat everybody down and I said, okay, on the farm this year, what was it that we raised? Can we start making a list of all the different things that we grew on the farm? And it just went on and on and on. There were so many different crops we grew and different markets that we were growing for. So corn was being grown for food, distilling, seed, feed, open pollinated corn for food. Just a lot of different ways we were selling these grains. And then we grew a lot for our own use. So the bottom line is we're kind of busy and we do a lot of different things, but we live and breathe grains. And it is a very important component in farming that the small farmers, the most of the organic vegetable farmers don't even think about grains, but it is very important to us. And so as I was looking over the schedule for this conference and thinking about the different concepts that were going to be talked about, what became very obvious was that, to me, is that there's always been food insecurity. This is not a new concept. Human history is predicated on food insecurity. Famines, wars, crop failures, migrations, food spoilage, just long, hard winters that by March, the available food resources are running short. Human history is based around food insecurity and how to deal with it. And so I think it's really important to realize that we're not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel here. Human history also has figured out ways to deal with food insecurity. One of the things that was brought home to me several years ago very clearly by a speaker that I heard, her name was Mary Robinson. She was the head of UNICEF, I believe, but also the president of Ireland for a while. And she talked about the difference between starvation and malnutrition, that starvation is largely a lack of protein and carbohydrates in a person's diet. Malnutrition is much more subtle, and it can be the lack of key nutrients like vitamin C or vitamin A or vitamin D, which would result in blindness or scurvy or rickets. That is more a food quality issue. So starvation is sheer calories and malnutrition is more food quality. And again, this is something that is not new to human history. We've had to deal with it. Our grandmothers knew that food security means cooking from scratch, but it means cooking from scratch using non-perishable staples, grains and beans. Virtually every culture around the world has some form of grains and legumes as a core food product, cuisine. And there's a good reason for this. It is filling, it is nutritious, but beans and grains together make what's called a complete protein. It is the full component of amino acids that human bodies need to be healthy. And so thinking about food security, our grandmothers knew food security was the sack of flour and the sack of beans in the pantry that could be whipped up into a nutritious filling meal for the family. And it would not go bad. It would not spoil. It didn't need refrigeration. It didn't need any special care. It was food that was going to be there and was going to be available. So I think I was thinking about the whole concept of, are you getting a whole lot of stuff in the back on there across the top? I hope not. Food security is a empowerment issue that I feel is really important for us to teach young people, teach our communities, teach ourselves that it's important to be the little red hen. It's important to have the ethic that we have to provide for ourselves. We have to be self-sufficient if we want to be resilient. We have to grow our own food, but we have to eat as much as possible what we produce. We get better nutrition, we get better quality food, we get better flavor, it's less expensive, it's more independent, it's more creative, but it also teaches us that no one's going to do it for us. we have to do it for ourselves. And I hope the list of all the crops we grow will, farm people are busy. I get it that women don't have as much time to do basic food preparation, but I don't either. And still we do, because that's just the way we do things. So I want to talk a little bit about grains. What am I talking about when I'm talking about grains? I'm talking about 6 primarily the grains upon which temperate zone agriculture is based. That would be wheat, barley, triticale, rye, and oats. Triticale is a cross between wheat and rye, so that's a relatively new grain. The other ones are fairly ancient. Spelt is a wheat relative that is coming back, but it is not as high yielding, so it has not been as important in agriculture. These 6 grains are grown for food, for animal feed, for forage, that is like hay, as seed, as cover crops in vegetable farming, and also increasingly with the resurgence of craft brewery and craft distillery, there's markets in that too. So for beverage, those are the core of what temperate zone agriculture grains are based around. There are also some wheat relatives, heritage wheats like emmer and einkorn that are more specialty products. And then throughout the world, there are other grains: corn, rice, dry beans, lentils, peas, buckwheat, and quinoa. All of these are important in certain locations, and like quinoa is native to the high Andes. It was extremely important in the nutrition of the high Andes, but it has now become an artisan hip grain. But that doesn't mean that the people who lived in the high Andes don't still see that as just a basic staple in their diet. And this is what I'm going to talk about. For us farmers, grains are important agriculturally. But they give us greater opportunities for crop rotation, to break pest cycles, for our weed control, to improve organic matter and soil building, to spread out our workload. So over half our farm is already planted now to winter grains that were planted last fall. And they're basically on autopilot now until we harvest them in August, July and August. But that means we don't have to do anything to plant them or tend them until we harvest them in the summer. That means that we can use our labor and do the work on other things this spring and not have to worry about those acreage. Grains can be harvested for dry grain to make bread out of. They can also be used as cover crops or for forage. There's a lot of different ways we use grains on our farm. So here's a picture of a wheat kernel. Now, wheat is classified as either hard or soft, red or white, or winter or spring. The hard or soft has to do with the density and the chemical composition of the endosperm, that is the starchy part in the middle. The red or white has to do with the color of the bran, that is the seed coat covering. And the winter or spring has to do with when you plant it. Winter wheat is planted in the fall, spring wheat is planted in the spring. So all wheat is classified by these 6 terms. When you run into a farmer, they'll say, I grow hard red wheat or hard red winter wheat. And that defines the category. It also, to some degree, defines the use and therefore the market. The hard wheats, the hard wheats, either red or white, tend to be higher in gluten, higher in protein, and therefore they are more likely to be used for bread flour. They have the dough made from hard wheats has more elasticity. It holds carbon dioxide better, and therefore that makes the bread rise. It is the primary component in bread flour and in bread. And so that is the main use. Whole wheat flour is not what you think. If you buy whole wheat flour in the store, it is not the whole wheat grain that has been ground up and put in a bag. It gets fractionated. Usually the endosperm, or usually the embryo, the germ is removed because that's higher in oils and would make the flour go rancid if it was put in a bag and left in the bag for any length of time. So whole wheat flour that is purchased in the store is not really whole wheat. It is mainly just the endosperm and the bran. White flour is just the endosperm. So if you can think about that picture I showed a few minutes ago, it's just the starchy part in the middle that is white flour, and therefore has had a lot of the nutritive value removed. And so whole wheat flour has the bran and has better flavor, but it also has more nutrition. Wheat can also be sprouted. A lot of wheat, traditional wheat dishes are sprouted or fermented. Fermented is really important in making wheat and other grains less likely to cause allergies. The fermenting breaks down some of the allergens in the grains and makes them less reactive. Also adds flavor. We call it sourdough, and a lot of people prefer that flavor. So I want to show you a bit of alchemy in action. It's kind of fun to watch. It's one of the things that I feel is very important that people realize. You have control over some of this stuff. You can buy wheat and maybe as a community, buy a neat little grinder like this. Now this is whole wheat because the embryo, the germ, is being ground together. And the ability to be able to store grains in their whole form and then grind them into flour just creates this opportunity of flavor and of nutrition and of resilience. And it's fun. This is the kind of thing that in some of these schoolyard gardens and programs or community programs, showing children, showing anyone that you can grind wheat and make flour out of it, and then use that flour to make food, completes a real circle. It completes a circle of feeling that, hey, that was wheat a few minutes ago. That was an agricultural product. Now it's flour, and now it's bread. And if you want to engage children in the whole idea of doing something so basic and so important for just ordinary everyday food, there's nothing that might be weird because everybody eats bread. Showing children that this can be done, showing anybody that this can be done is really empowering. And then coming up with a sort of a one-size-fits-all recipe that could be used for making any different kinds of bread, but something very simple, something very reliable. And then people feel that, once you know the notes to sing, you can sing most anything. You can make sweet rolls or flatbread or pizza or breadsticks or, any kind of interesting bread that could be a community resource. So that's something that is a very simple thing to do. Soft wheat is plumper. The kernels are plumper. They're more opaque. They're not as glassy like. The flour feels more powdery, more like cornstarch. This is what's used for pastry flour, cake flour, or used in non-yeast risen food products like muffins or pancakes. This is a very useful product too. I come up with a very basic pie crust recipe, throw any kind of fruit in it, and suddenly there's a very good food that anybody could make There is no better breakfast food than pie. And so for a kid who is kind of reluctant to eat breakfast, if they were to make their own apple pie out of flour that they just ground and mixed up and rolled out and pushed together into some sort of rough pie crust, they'll eat it. They'll eat it and they'll get good nutrition from it. Spelt is a wheat relative. It is lower in gluten. It still is higher protein, but it's lower in the gluten proteins that can be allergenic. This is something that is being grown more and more in New York, and there is a strong market. It is what's called it has a persistent gloom. It is a hulled grain. Some grains like barley, oats, and spelt are hulled when they're harvested, and they have to go through an extra step in processing to remove the hull. Wheat, rye, and triticale are unhulled grains. When they're harvested, they can be used right out of the field. So spelt does need to be dehulled. But here's another empowerment. Who doesn't like noodles? Listening to Leisha's talk at the last one, she was talking about making carrot top pesto. And all I could think of is, well, you got to put it on something. And you got to have noodles. And so that's me rolling noodles, this neat little hand roller thing, and my daughter eating them. But it's a very simple process to mix up some flour, water, salt, oil, and roll them through this little thing. And or you can roll it out with a rolling pin. I've had a Polish friend who would make all of her noodles just rolling it out with a rolling pin and cutting them. But the opportunities for using these homemade noodles are vast. They don't have to just be noodles, but they could be lasagna or pot stickers or pierogi, or all sorts of different little dumplings of all sorts. Wouldn't that be fun for children to make? Wouldn't that be fun for a community cooking class to make their own noodles and then some sort of sauce to go on them? But we grow grain here in New York. Your neighbors in the Adirondack area grow grain. You've got a flour mill right there in Essex, in Willsboro, called Champlain Valley Milling. There are other grain operations in the Champlain Valley, and there's one over in Shoreham, Charlotte, that grinds grain. And there are a lot of opportunities for us to use our own grains and make them into highly nutritious and important items. But if you want to make something fun, if you want to make something that may not be core nutrition, but just adds a tremendous amount of deliciousness to life, a spelt pound cake made with some sour cream is beyond good. When I give this talk or similar talks, and I'm actually in person, I bring one of these spelt pound cakes around along and start handing it around right now. And it's amazing how people's eyes light up because it's delicious. Oats. We grow oats in New York too. And oats, as they come out of the field, have a hull on them, but once run through a processor to dehull them, and they turn into what are called oat groats, which then can be rolled into making rolled oats or oatmeal. It's a two-step process, but makes a much better product than what you'd buy as rolled oats, Quaker rolled oats in the store that taste like absolutely nothing. Rolled fresh oats just are delicious and have texture, have flavor that you wouldn't even imagine oats could have. They're also very nutritious, a good source of B vitamins and iron, and soluble fiber that has been shown to be very good at reducing cholesterol. You can roll them, or there's another process called steel cut or Irish oatmeal that are just basically oat groats that have been chopped into little pieces. Old-fashioned oatmeal does need to be cooked for about 15 minutes. Quick oatmeal, a little less, about 5 minutes. And instant oatmeal, just add hot water. The difference in that is how cooked the rolled oats are before you get them, whether they've already been steamed or whether they're just rolled. There is two different kinds of oat flakers. The one at the top is mine. It's a very simple little hand thing that it just squishes the oat kernels and turns them into little oat flakes. The one at the bottom I don't have, but it's a much fancier electric model. Either one, they work. Oh, barley. There is no more beautiful crop in the field than barley. Barley is just lovely. It has these feathery glooms, the beards, the stuff on top that catches the light. It is glistening. It is just so beautiful. We grow a fair amount of barley. We grow it both to sell into the food market, but also into the malting market. Malting is a process that is used to sprout and then roast the grains before they are made into beer. It is a new market for a lot of New York farmers, but it's a good one. We can do this. Pearled barley is barley that has been polished after harvesting to take the hull off. And that's usually what you see in soups, is the little barley kernels that have been pearled, that have been polished. But the malting barley is, our children used to sing a song that was said, beer is liquid bread, it's good for you. In a way it is, because beer is made out of barley. The food quality of barley is very high, and it's delicious stuff. I really like pearled barley. Rye is easy to grow. It's extremely hardy. It's a very simple grain to get a good yield on. High in protein, high in B vitamins, potassium, magnesium, lysine, shown to be really healthy for a lot of treating a lot of diseases or preventing. But it does have a fairly high level of allergenicity, and it works much better in bread, much better tolerated if it is fermented into a sourdough. And that is a traditional way of doing it. If you go to the store and look at rye bread, you see Jewish rye is usually sourdoughed. And that is because it just is easier to digest, and it also tastes better. So rye is a fun one to work with. Either by itself, it doesn't have a whole lot of gluten, so it doesn't support rising very well, but it can be mixed with wheat flour and make a really delicious rye bread. Okay, corn. Corn is important. Corn is a very important nutritional grain. This is a picture of a corn seed. What we usually eat in corn is the endosperm. That's the starchy area in the middle, along with some of the pericarp, which is the outer layer that is the shell of the corn. Usually when you buy cornmeal, the embryo area has been removed because that's very high in oil. And again, the cornmeal would go rancid if it was not taken out. But it also removes a good portion of the flavor of corn. So corn that is freshly ground, and I found this in a lot of different things, freshly ground corn that I grind through the grinder and then make something with, has a totally different flavor. It tastes sunshiny, it tastes sweet. There's just a richness to it that purchased cornmeal will never have. There are two different terms, hybrid and open pollinated corn. Hybrid corn is what is grown on millions of acres in the Midwest, very uniform, very high yielding, mostly all used for animal feed or ethanol, not much flavor. Open pollinated corn is heritage corn. It is much more variable in appearance. It also is much more, there's a lot more variation to it, a lot more character to it, and a lot more flavor. So I like grinding open pollinated corn just because it tastes so much better. Corn comes in all different colors. It comes in all different flavors. The preparation of making masa or hominy is a traditional one that the people of Mexico and Central America and South America worked out by treating cornmeal with lye. It breaks down some of the anti-nutritional factors. It also makes the B vitamins more available, and that it also makes a much more a smoother dough, so that tortillas don't have a whole lot of rough areas that could break them up. That's kind of a complicated process. And so buying masa is a little bit easier if you're making tortillas than if you're making them from scratch. But for those of us who are not making that, it's pretty easy to just grind up corn and use it as is. Most of those pictures are from our farm. We've grown a lot of different kinds of corn. So if you want to make something that people are going to want to eat, vegetables out of a school garden or a community garden, good tomato sauce, or a mixture of different vegetables, you got to put it on top of something. Now you can put it on top of noodles, or you can put it on top of polenta, or you can call polenta grits. It doesn't really matter. They're the same thing basically. And it's a very easy thing to make. Grind up some corn, mix it with water and salt, and cook it. And suddenly you've got grits, or you've got polenta, or you've got a base for all sorts of other deliciousness that can be put on top. It can be any meal of the day, and very nutritious. Get a little fancier, grind up the corn, make corn muffins, or corn cakes, or there are Johnny cakes, or there's a lot of different ways to use corn. And if you've never had fresh ground cornmeal, you'll just be blown away by the flavor, because it is so much better. We talk about summer tomatoes being so much better than grocery store January tomatoes. There's the same difference in grains. I think a lot of people don't realize that grains have flavor, because they're always just kind of a platform for other things. But corn, there's nothing like fresh ground corn as far as flavor. And I think any child in a school garden or a community garden program who had a chance to grind up their own grain and then make something, or corn, and then make something with it, you'd have a convert for life. There are many other grains out there. The two pictures on the bottom, the beautiful blue flower and then the little fairy balls, that's flax. Flax is a lovely crop. It's not particularly high yielding here in upstate New York, but it is a beautiful crop that I think that more of us could grow and really enjoy the sheer ethereal beauty of it. The top picture is quinoa growing in Peru, I believe. That can grow around here too. It can be bought out of ornamental garden seed catalogs, because people do grow it as an ornamental, because it's such a dramatic plant, but it does make the little seeds that can be eaten. We grow a lot of dry beans on our farm. We grow red kidneys, black beans, pinto beans. There are many different kinds of beans, and they're very easy to grow. It's no harder to grow dry beans than it is to grow snap beans. They are the same plant, and they can be harvested. It's fun to shell out beans, and they're delicious, and they can be cooked in many different ways. This next picture is rice. Now this happens to be Panama. This is my son-in-law's family's farm in Panama. But I've been doing a fair amount of reading about Goa culture in the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, and watching a series on Netflix of African-American traditional cuisine. And the episode I was looking at last night had to do with Carolina Gold, which is a traditional rice variety from the low country of South Carolina. And they were talking about how Carolina Gold traditionally is combined with a little red bean that grows in the same area to make some of the Gullah specialties. We can't grow rice easily up here, but it definitely is an American crop that has grown in the United States successfully, and we should celebrate that as something that is key to a great deal of our really delicious dishes. Our Puerto Rican neighbors make pigeon peas and rice and sofrito, and it's good. It really is. But we can do that. We can do a lot of this from scratch. Just pictures of wheat. I have this vision, this dream, that someday I can empower people to want to invest $1,000 in setting up community kitchens or school kitchens with a grain grinder, a noodle roller, and really making this be a resource for communities. You don't have to everybody own their own. There's a garden out, there's a CSA farm out in Massachusetts that has one of these bicycle equipped grain grinders, the one at the bottom. And when the people come on Saturday morning to pick up their CSA packages, they sign up for 15 minutes on the bicycle to grind their grain for the week. Wouldn't that be fun to do in a community program? To see the process of being able to turn something as mundane as grain into a food product and have fun with it. The grain grinder on the lower right-hand side, for many years I used that because that's what I had and it's cheap and it makes a decent quality product. The one I'm currently using is the one up here that I showed a picture of earlier. That's a good deal more expensive, but for a community program, looking for a reliable machine that could be used by a number of different families, it would be a worthy investment. Now, when my daughter was in high school, she's a veterinarian now in Shoreham, Vermont. If you happen to run into Dr. Elizabeth Martens over there at Valleywide, that's my daughter. But when she was in college, in high school, we put together a program for us as a family to see if we could provide all of our food, pretty much all of our food, from our own farm. And we did. We came very, very close. We had cows at the time, and we had hens, and we pickled and canned and froze and butchered and made butter, and it was a lot of work, but it was an experience that it changed us all because we really became aware of the feasibility, how much work it was, but the feasibility of being able to provide for ourselves. But it also really put into perspective how traditionally history, over human history, this is not something that is optional. This is what people have done in order to make it through the winter. So, again, food security is nothing new. Providing for ourselves is nothing new. Learning how to do it is part of our cultural literacy that we have largely lost. And there's some pictures from our farm of things we have done. For more information or to just talk, we have a website, we're on Facebook, and that's my email address. So I'd be happy to talk to people. This is a fun project. We live and breathe grain. I sell a lot of feed. We grow a lot of feed or a lot of grain, but we also are people, and we also like to eat. And we also like good food, and therefore, this is how we do it. And that is the end.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. That was awesome. The chat was filling up with comments about how good all those recipes looked. Sorry that we're not in person to try that cake. So I just wanted to open it up to everybody for questions if you have any. And then also just to kick us off, I'd like to ask a question about, someone that's interested in starting to grow grain and what's a great crop to start with, and thinking about like small scale and ease of harvesting and just exploring it as an option.
Well, wheat in a garden is fun. It's not going to make a huge amount of yield, but it's easy to grow. It can be planted on some spring wheat can be planted on the edge of a garden, and can be a really good way to see the process of growing what starts out looking like just grass, a lush grass, that then suddenly shoots up these heads of the traditional grain head, and you think, wow, where'd that thing come from? And then when it matures and dries down, it can be harvested by hand, can be rubbed out. There are all sorts of ways of threshing and winnowing grain that are traditional, and I certainly can guide somebody through that. It's an easy thing to do on the edge of a garden. You're not going to get a lot of grain, and it'll be more of an experiment than basic food preparation, but it certainly can be done, and it's a good way to start, especially in a community garden where others can come and look at it and think and learn from it.
Awesome. And then we also had a question from Allison of, do you sell direct to consumers? And then kind of in addition to that is, how's the market been, and those relationships and getting your product to customers?
Personally, here at Lakeview, no, we don't sell edible grains direct to the consumer, but fortunately we now have another business in our family empire. Our oldest son, Peter, has spun off a new business. He's calling Seneca Grain and Bean. If you type in www.senecagrainandbean.com, their website comes up, and they sell a lot of different grains and dry beans direct to consumers. It's not what some consumers might think are the kind of packaging that they're looking for. It's mostly 25 and 50-pound bags, but it's what we grow on our farm or what our neighbors have grown. There are also flour mills and grain operations throughout New York. There's a really good little flour mill near Ithaca called Farmer Ground Flour, that if you go on their website, there's a lot of regionally and locally grown grain that they're turning into a commercial quality flour product. And that would be a good place to get grains. Wegmans uses our grains in a lot of their artisan breads. From near our stores brand largely has ours and some other people in the area, the grains that grow in this area. So there are different ways of getting it, but there are definitely sources.
Thank you. And we have another question from On to Farm, which love that name. Of how many pounds of oats, what kind of volume of oats do you need to grow to make 5-pound bag of oatmeal? Thinking about scale.
Okay, that's a good question, because there's a lot of range there. Generally, I don't think in 5-pound units. An acre of oats should yield about a ton of grain. Now, a ton of harvested grain is not a ton of oatmeal, because it'll need to be dehulled and then cleaned, and so there's going to be some loss off of that. But probably an acre of grain, an acre of oat plants would yield maybe 800 pounds, 700, 800 pounds of oat groats. You'll just have to do the math down from there. Probably a small garden plot could come up with a 5-pound bag, but they would need to have, well, there is such a thing as hulless oats. There are varieties that are naturally genetically hulless, and they don't yield as well, but that would be a practical way of putting in oats that could then be harvested and used directly out of the field.
And that was the follow-up question about hulless oats. So yeah.
There are some, this is something that's been, there are hulless oats and hulless barley. The varieties are not readily available, and they are not as high yielding as the hulled oats or the hulled barley. But we are carrying a variety of hulless oats at Lakeview this year called Streaker. And that it makes a pretty good product. It's not 100% hulless. There's still about 5% hulls in the harvested grain, but they can be picked out, and that is a way that people can grow their own.
Awesome, thank you. I don't see any more questions. I welcome people to put anything else in the chat. Yeah. I love the idea of having, grain as part of a community garden or kind of demonstration garden, because we at Pitney Meadows were planning a vegetable garden, but didn't really think about grain and how, we offer vegetables, but don't offer grain. So thinking about, that full diet and having that as a demonstration as well.
One of the things that has really struck me is how important it is for a community, when you think about resiliency and self-sufficiency, to build farms, build the capacity to grow a complete diet. And we all think about vegetable farming, we might think about fruit farming, maybe chickens, but grains tend to be the neglected elephant in the room. We're okay with going out and buying noodles or going out and buying bread, but there's no reason why that can't be part of the same component. And it really teaches a different sense of that we can build a system that provides all of our nutritional needs in upstate New York. Our climate is such that we can do that.
I had a comment in the chat of growing cover crops yet harvesting for food is nice, which I know that cover crops and harvesting for grain is different. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you don't necessarily.
That's one of my favorite topics. I think we need to think about having our cover crops and eating them too, because we can do that so many different ways. There is nothing better if you planted as a cover crop last fall, Austrian winter peas, which is a really nice cover crop. There is nothing better in the spring than a salad of Austrian winter pea shoots. They are the most delicious green early in the spring. Tillage radishes, they're wonderful. Why just grow them as a cover crop when you can also eat them? Foraged turnips, they're delicious. Might as well eat those too. Oats are an important cover crop, but after you've grown them for a cover crop, leave some of them and then harvest, especially if you do the hulless oats, and harvest some and eat that. I think it's an important way to show on a demonstration model that cover crops are not a time of no production or nothing. One of the complaints I heard early on about organic farming is that you had to leave land unproductive for years in order to be organic, and that's just not true. We can do a lot of different things with our cover crops that on our farm, we harvest a lot of them and put them through the cows and then put the manure back out on the farm. So we're growing clover and then harvesting it for forage. And it is a cover crop, but it's also a forage, and it also is a soil builder and organic matter. And there's just so many different ways to see our crops not as single use or a single purpose.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the Austrian winter peas as a spring harvest, because I've actually done that with your Austrian winter peas, where we had a field that we did, spring carrots, and then we did cover crop mix for like the fall carrots, and our spring carrots got totally washed out. It was a really bad rain event. So we did some calculations and actually made more on that field by just harvesting the shoots from our cover crop than we would have the carrots.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just became a staple for us of selling it wholesale, having it to CSA members, and people loved it. So I think that's a great point to bring up, is that's edible as well, and it's delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then also we just had a comment about, food self-resilience and, putting up food and, growing your own food. So I think that's a great thing to bring up as well, of, canning and preserving and trying to do as much as you can on your own.
Well, it is something that our culture has largely lost over the past 2 generations. But as we have supply disruptions like what we've experienced over the past 2 years, as we think about food quality and food deserts, and the whole concept of malnutrition is not necessarily not having enough food. It is not having enough of the right nutrients. And we can be malnourished and be overfed. And I think a lot of the United States is. We have to think more in terms of food quality and how we can provide food quality for ourselves. We can't count on the big food manufacturers to care about food quality for us. We have to care about it for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think what you said about, the past two generations, we really lost a lot of that, because for me, when I'd visit my great grandmother, her basement, she couldn't go down to her basement anymore, but it was filled with canned goods that she had canned over the years. But then my grandmother, like convenience food, canned food, she didn't do it. And then, so my mother didn't do that. So it was interesting that once I got into farming, I taught my mom how to can.
Mm-hmm.
And so now she gardens and cans, because once the convenience was there, that knowledge was lost for a couple generations.
I was the same way. I learned it from scratch because I didn't learn it as a child. I didn't grow up on a farm. I feel like we need to be bringing this back as part of education, so that the capacity to do it, whether we choose to do it or not, is one thing, but we should know how to do it.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's not hard once you try it and you get that experience, and yeah, just exposure and thinking that like, yeah, you can feed yourself, and it's not intimidating to plant a seed or can tomatoes. Like I was telling, different people that I've interned, who've been my interns over the years, is like, you guys have YouTube, like you can figure anything out.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information out there.
And if you get home from work or from school and you don't know what to eat, grind up some corn, put some tomatoes on top, a little bit of cheese, suddenly you have a meal. And it's not something that is hard to do, and it's not something to have to spend a lot of money on. So we need to have that sense of creativity that providing our own gives us.
Yeah, and just one last comment that I think is really great is thinking about the difference in nutrition from, fresh farm grains from ones that are in the grocery store, because we think about that a lot in produce and meat and certain things, but you don't really think about that when it comes to grain of, if someone's able to purchase grain from your farm versus grain that's coming from other sources and staying in the grocery store for a long time.
Definitely, that's true.
Awesome. Well, it's 3 o'clock, so thank you so much for that presentation. That was really great to see. And
If anybody wants to talk more about this, they can just email me. This is something I feel strongly about, so I'd be happy to participate further if someone wanted to email.
awesome. Thank you so much. We're definitely going to try some grains in our community garden. This was great.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you.